Welcome to our podcast, Our Story to Tell, where we share the behind the scenes of moving our family abroad and how that move changed everything for us.
We're Risa and Tanner, an American family living life abroad with our two little adventures. From the US to Germany, Japan, and now Italy, this podcast is about transformation, not just travel.
Everyone has a story, and this is our story. And who knows, maybe some parts of it will sound a little bit like yours too.
Let's dive in.
Today's episode is shifting gears a little bit because for the last, practically all of the episodes that we've talked about before have been about our life in Germany, Japan, and now here in Italy. And of course, talking about like our lives and like our perspectives and how everything has changed. But we thought it would be interesting to talk about like the what if behind if we never moved away from the States, never moved from Utah.
Yeah, it makes us really curious to think about where we would be living. Would we be living in the same house? Would our friends be the same? Who would we be? Would we have stayed in the church? Would we have not? There's just a lot to dissect and think about. And in general, this episode's just to be kind of lighthearted and fun. Obviously, you never know who we would have been had we had stayed. But we're going to kind of share our thoughts of what we think might have happened.
Yeah. Before we dive into like a bunch of the what ifs of life staying like in the States, there's a really good chance that we still would have ended up abroad. Like we mentioned in one of our episodes, we talked about how I didn't have just one offer when we came to Germany. We actually had one to England and one to Japan. And so we chose Germany for Central European reasons. And it turned out to be an amazing experience for us. We're really happy that we chose that one to be our first abroad experience, wouldn't you say, right?
Yeah.
And so like reflecting back on all of those opportunities, we still think we would have ended up abroad.
Yeah, and I think a major reason for that is because once we graduated college, I became a registered dietitian. You finished your internship with Boeing. We took off on like a 6-month backpacking trip to Southeast Asia. And by the time we got back, we were changed people. Honestly, life in Utah after that trip kind of felt small for us. And we don't mean that in like a superiority way, but when you've seen so much and you've, explored new parts of the world and met new people and experienced new cultures and religions and languages, your worldview changes. It gets bigger. So you can imagine that naturally after we had a bit of that experience, Utah just kind of felt small.
And it wasn't just small. I think we both felt this hunger for different than what we had experienced. And it's, again, not to say that we didn't love everything about what we did and experienced growing up, because we did. We truly look back and say we had an opportunity of a lifetime to grow up in where we did, and all of our experience led us to become the people who we were. And in the same breath, we both really felt like there was more to what life looked like. So we should probably set the stage just a little bit here. I applied for and was accepted to have my first position. I worked at the Air Force Base in Utah. It was a great step to get into what eventually would lead into my career now. That was also a very busy year. Like a few days before starting my new job, we found out that you were pregnant. Later on that year, we had Willa. So stepping into some like pretty big roles with like a first full-time job. You were starting up your private practice. We were first-time parents. It was a big year.
Yeah, it was a really big year, not to mention that's the year that COVID happened. We purchased our very first home, which was never intended to be like our forever home, but more so the first property, hopefully to put on like a real estate portfolio. That came with a lot of hard work. We renovated that. And when we mean renovated, like a complete renovation. Then we did that with a little baby. So we moved into that home when Willa was 4 months old. So we were living in it while it was a mess. And then, like I mentioned, there was COVID, but also the state of the US, the political climate at that time was changing a lot.
Yeah, and it was likely two parts. We saw it changing a lot, probably because we were paying more attention to it, being out of college, paying more attention to things. Me working in the government clearly had a big influence in like just the discussions about things. But yeah, it was a difficult time. There was the protests all over, the Black Lives Matter movement. There was COVID on top of it, which had a bunch of propaganda and, conspiracy theories behind it. It was an interesting way to start out our first very big years, like formative years of like a career and a life as parents and stuff. Yeah, like that's the kind of the situation that we were in. That was our normal for the time being. But like we had always hoped that with COVID ending, which we didn't know when that would be at the time, that like things would get back to normal. We would have a little bit more of a routine. And we were just starting to try and, I guess, envision what life would look like for us.
I feel like this is probably a time that a lot of people started to have more meaningful, in-depth conversations.
And by no means have we ever considered ourselves experts on any of it, but we also do appreciate like thinking, what change can we make? And really, ultimately, like what opinions do we have about it? Those kind of conversations and questions came up.
Yeah, and also because of COVID, that meant that religiously for us, we weren't able to attend in-person church. So if you haven't been following along, we were raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or shorter version, Mormons. Anyways, this is the time where all church members were doing at-home church. So because of that, you can kind of picture here, COVID lowers social life, right? We're kind of all kept into our homes. Church, we don't have in-person church. We just moved and we have a new baby, so we're at home a lot more. Her schedule's dictating our schedules more. We were pretty antisocial. And we didn't know the neighbors in our new area. We didn't know people in the city we moved to. It was quite isolating, and we felt that. Like we did. I don't think we were aware of how isolated it was until looking back, you know, and when we're in a different environment. But the reason I'm saying this is because this is also what life was like for us right before we left to Germany. Like our circle was fairly small because just as a reminder, before that, we had taken off on a backpacking trip. And before that, we were college students. So our closest friends were like our few high school friends that we've just always stayed in touch with. And then our college friends that you're close with, but you don't know how close you're going to be with time. Because sometimes friends are just there for a season rather than a whole lifetime, you know?
Yeah, we definitely were going through ebbs and flows of that like transition period. And it was, difficult to know exactly where things were going to lie out. But it was definitely setting a stage for us where the community was smaller.
But we thankfully lived fairly close to our families. We can drive to parents, do like a Sunday dinner if we want. And we had a couple friends, 20, 30 minutes driving as well, that we on occasion would be able to get together with, considering the state of the world. Okay, so now it's all speculation from here.
Starting off just like practical everyday things. We really were hoping that COVID would just like lighten up so that we could just feel like we could go to more social events, hang out with friends more, likely get to know like our neighbors. So I think that our social life would have expanded to our neighbors, at least the ones closer to our age. And church, I would imagine that we would have gone to church because most people in our neighborhood were members from what we had gathered. I think that church activity would have been something that we'd have had in our lives, physically going.
I think church would have been the main reason for our friends.
Probably.
That's just kind of how it is.
Yeah, at least locally, right? Like, I mean, in some way or another, you are attached to your community because of the church, right? And I think that's awesome. And it really does allow you to get to know people that you otherwise might not have, right? 2-3 streets over, you might not get to know that person, but at church, they're in your activities committee or whatever, and you get to know them.
I mean, if our closest neighbors were not active members, I love to think that we would have been friends with them, especially if there was other similarities, maybe being similar in age or with kids, et cetera, et cetera. But if they were members, we definitely would have known them through church. And then, anyone else that lives further, I just feel like when I think back to living in Utah, that's how we would have met people.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And our friends that we were close with before, like I'm thinking like the ones you mentioned, 10 to 30 minutes away. Yeah, I do think that we would have done more things together. I'm thinking like game nights, movie parties, holidays, doing things. If it wasn't with family, it would likely be with those closest friends.
Yes, the other opportunity we'd be able to meet friends is like through friends. Yeah. But other than that, I feel like church would have been the main social life.
Yeah, I don't think we would have been stretched too thin. Like we would have tried to keep the circle stronger than like too big of a net, I guess.
Yeah, our life is just so different now than it was then because Willa was a baby. So maybe I could have went to the local community events and met people that way.
Sure.
But yeah, I probably would have done some of that, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't give all of the credit to the church. I probably would have tried to do outreach. As I'm saying here, right? We're like dissecting this together. I probably would have eventually.
Yeah, done something like that. But I do think like day-to-day activities and stuff, obviously I had been at work, likely doing the same thing. We would have had to consider what days like would look like for you with Willa being so young, not at an age where we probably wouldn't have taken her to somewhere. But I don't know, like, what do you think daily life would have looked like for you?
I think kind of what it was, but probably a little more social. So doing the baby schedule, with the naps and the feeds and playing, yeah, just more social. We'd go out for a walk when you got home from work. That was something we loved to do at dinner, go for a walk, and then put her to sleep and have our own time and repeat. Like it does feel a little
Schedule-y.
I feel like that's kind of how a life with this young child is, right? You're kind of held to a routine a little bit more.
But we also would have been trying to like go and travel. I know that we would have tried to take advantage of like holidays. That's what I think about. Any 3 to 4 day week or holiday, we would have probably tried to take advantage to go see other parts of the US. National parks are obviously on the top of our list because we're nature lovers. So I could have seen that would have been like our adventures, right? Different than what we've experienced here in Europe, where it's like you get to go to another country over a 3-day, 4-day weekend. We would have just experienced other things, including like camping with family, doing little family get-togethers, family reunions of sorts. I think that those all would have been part of our lives.
Yeah, I think if our weekends weren't spent with friends, they would have been spent with family. That's kind of how it was before COVID hit. And we loved that. There's a lot of comfort and security in being able to see your family frequently, to be able to go and have Sunday dinner or go spend the weekend. And for us with a little child, like it felt so nice and helpful to feel that support on the rare occasion that we had it because of COVID, like to have more of that. I'm like, gosh, we would have had built-in babysitters, the stable life in Utah. Honestly, like it does feel beautiful. And I imagine it would be filled with so much love and our support circle would be really tight and big.
Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind as well that we would have had very strong support. And yeah, in reality, there's no two ways around it. Like our relationships with each one of our family members would have had the chance to be deeper, especially just getting to know like the daily things and like the more interests and doing activities like runs or hikes or whatever, like with people. I think to create more memories, of course, like there's no way around that.
Yeah, that version of life, it does feel really warm and solid.
Mm-hmm.
So the next kind of section we're going to talk about is jobs. So why don't you share kind of what you think that would have looked like for you?
Ironically, today I was talking with one of my past coworkers from the Air Force that I had worked at in Utah. I would like to think that I would have been in a position to take like a supervisory position at that job. There's been quite a bit of turnover since I left. Fortunately, I guess, started kind of a trend when I left. And there were a lot of people who took other overseas positions, who took other jobs. So I could see that as being a position that I would have likely still considered because I was doing a really good job. I was performing really well. I had gotten an early advancement. I think that there's a chance that could have very well been in my future and I could be in the same position that I was 5 years ago.
Really?
I think there's a good chance. I think there's a good chance just seeing how many people were leaving within 6 months to a year after I left.
Yeah, that is interesting to hear because where we lived was definitely more opportunity for you than like where we went to college at, Government has a lot of benefits, especially if you live abroad. But for us living in Utah, the benefits for U.S. government are less as civilian. And so you could have found a higher paying job for sure elsewhere.
Sure. And we definitely had considered that. And we've talked about that several times, even to talk about what our future looks like here. Whenever my contract's over, what do we do? Like, what is our next step forward? And it's always the balance between work-life, which I know some people, work-life balance is kind of like, it doesn't exist or whatever, but it's like, there is a huge difference between being a salaried employee and you're only expected to work 40 hours like it is within the US government versus somebody who they are like the main person to like respond to everything. They're on call all the time. Even if they're getting paid overtime, I guess that's a benefit. But for those people who have to put in 50, 60 hours a week for the same pay, we just have tried to avoid that.
Yeah, I do think if there was a job you would have taken outside of the government, it would have been a job that had a better work-life balance. Like definitely higher pay because we wouldn't have stepped down,
Yeah.
but something that's still aligned with our family goals to have as much time together as we can.
And there definitely are jobs out there. What about for you?
Well, for me, I had actually started a private practice when you were working at Hill Air Force Base. So that was my dream, and I left it behind to chase your dreams abroad. Just teasing. They were, of course, our dreams, but I did leave it behind, and that was hard because it takes time to build your own business. So I feel like, I'd started to do it, and ideally it would have continued to grow. I also had a part-time job in the meantime, which I loved and was something that was keeping me busy enough. Not to mention, I also have a nonprofit organization called NEAM, Nutrition Education Ending Malnutrition. And pre-COVID, we were like 2 years in with that. And so we took a pause. And this year in 2026, I've just restarted it. So I definitely would have restarted that as soon as I could. We would have been doing more domestic work. And, I feel like I would have had my feet in a lot of different things. I kind of like the non-traditional hours. It's nice to not be tied down to PTO and a set schedule, especially with kids at home. I do think I would have prioritized trying to be home as much as possible. I guess that's kind of the perfect segue to the next section that we're going to talk about is kids. I don't even think I would have gotten a full-time job because childcare is just so expensive in the States.
Yeah.
And I also feel like on top of that, it's twofold that I do think I was at the mindset that to be the best mom I could be, that meant being a stay-at-home mom and spending as much time with my kids.
Yeah, I agree that mentality would likely have stuck just because it's surrounded by you so much. And there's nothing wrong with it. If you're able to do it, so many people love that opportunity.
And if you want to do it.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. If you want to. Like you can be an amazing mom, whether or not you're home with your kids all day or if you're a full-time professional and then you're present after work. Like both of those can exist and they do exist. So this is kind of the interesting part about kids. Our girls are about 3 and change years difference. When we talked about having a gap, we really liked that idea. We feel like 2 is good now, but had we continued on that trend with 3 years in between, we would be expecting a baby within the next couple months as of right now.
Yeah, I would be pregnant and pregnant.
Yeah. But that's, not what we decided. We feel like we're done right now with 2 kids, and that feels really great. But I think if we hadn't moved abroad and we had stayed in Utah, I do think that there's a good chance that we would have had a third. Again, it's difficult to know. It's just I feel like moving abroad also opened our eyes to so many things. One of those was we want to be able to give ample time, more time to each of our girls and to each of our kids so that we can both be happy and we can also be adapt and able to like take care of them and be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And 2 felt like a great number. So
when you have more kids, obviously your time is just divided in more ways. That was a huge thing for us is we just want to give as much as we can to our girls. And when we had Noah, we went into it with the mindset that she would probably be our last. And it has felt so good. But it is kind of crazy to think about had we not moved, there is a more likely chance that we would have probably had 3 kids. And also, who knows, if we would have been in Utah, childcare would have been far less than the experience that we've had. And raising kids takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. I think one of the reasons we think we would have had 3 kids was because our support circle would have been much larger. So although we didn't have family close enough for them to be like the daily babysitter, we didn't have that, we still would have been able to have more reprieve, more date nights, more, friends helping out and swaps, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, there is also another alternate version where I feel like I would have experienced our kids being home full time all the way up until preschool and kindergarten. Whereas here our experience has been that Willa entered into German Kita at 2. and has continued that since. And Noah has started Italian Asilo at 2.5. So, I mean, it's just hard to compare. And I could see that influencing maybe the decision. To provide context to the area that we grew up in northern Utah, a lot of families have a lot of kids, at least compared to like the general population in the States. And then especially compared to like Europe birth rates. Utah, I don't know what it is right now. Do you remember?
I can't remember what it was, but you and I came from both large families. You had 5 siblings. I had 4 siblings. And there were several families, even within our church communities, that had 6, 7, or 8 kids, like multiple families. So it wasn't uncommon. It was more uncommon to have families that only had 1, 2 kids.
And growing up, I always thought I'd have 4 to 5. And then we had Willa, and I think that number became 3 to 4. And then she got older and we got pregnant with Noah, and we were like, maybe 2 to 3. And then we had Noah, and it was like, no, this feels right. So it's kind of how it worked in our minds.
And one part that probably influences us is seeing like other families in Europe having smaller families as well. And just like talking about it and hearing like their reasonings and stuff, it probably contributed to that as well. But there were multiple factors. One thing for sure that we recognize and in some ways like wish could be possible, and of course it could have been possible, but of course like we made our decision to move, is the relationship like with our girls to our family. To grandparents, like having parties with grandparents or going to birthday parties and events for their cousins and stuff. We do mourn those missed opportunities. Of course, we still feel very happy with like the decision that we made, but like it's hard to envision like what that would have looked like in so many ways.
Yeah, this is the part where if I was to get emotional in any part, it would be this topic because, our girls absolutely love our family. They love talking about them. They talk about going to Utah to see family fairly frequently. And when they come out here, I mean, it's just such a big thing. If we were to have raised our kids with family, of course, that would have been their normal. And I think they would have loved it. Loved it because our parents are both very hands-on. They're amazing grandparents. And I know they would have been so supportive. And for me, even when I think about Willa's birthday, she spent her 1-year-old birthday in Utah right before we left to Germany. But it was with COVID, so it was very limited in numbers.
And very small.
Yes. But her 3rd birthday, we went back to Utah. It was just a packed house. We had cousins and grandparents and her great-grandparents and aunts and uncles. Being able to experience that was a moment where it's like, gosh, like, this is what it's like. And like, we know that feeling because that's what it was for us growing up. But to like see that for your kid, oh, like that's when it hits.
Yeah. And we also have to look at it from the other side too. We loved that moment very much. And like Willa still talks about when can she go back again. And like just tonight we were doing like an activity with her and she's like, Dad, like when are we gonna go back to Utah? And just like visit family because she genuinely just like loves the memories that she has of there, which is, we wouldn't want it any other way. We wouldn't want her to like, no, I don't want to go see family or whatever. Like we're happy it's there. But we also do recognize on the other side, like sometimes being close to a lot of family, like it can feel like you're balancing your own personal small bubble family and supporting everyone else. Like it would be dismissive of us to just say, oh, it would have been so happy all the time, like going to these events, because they all take energy, they take time, and you don't always have all the time.
When you have 4 siblings on each side, and then you're trying to grow your own family. Yeah, that's exactly right. When we moved to Germany, we felt like, oh, wow, like it is kind of nice to not have to juggle the schedules of, whose Sunday dinner is it this time, or like whose turn is it for Thanksgiving, and like holidays. I remember like we tried to rotate and try and make it more fair and just see as much family as we can. But when each side of your family has multiple Christmas parties and birthdays for cousins, and some family live in different states, to try and support as much as you can is the goal, and it can become really, really busy.
I still think, going back to the first conversation of this podcast, discussion point with this episode is, what would it be like for us? And I do feel like we would have been very supportive, very involved in as much as possible. I mean, our past performance would have been a good track record for it. We were visiting family, switching off almost every other weekend, right? Yeah. And going back and visiting. So I do think that that's what it looked like for our kids. And just like it's fun to think about what could have been with it, a bit painful sometimes
Yeah.
as well. But we also don't want to like step over the fact that with the distance, the times that we have gotten together make them especially more meaningful.
Yeah, they feel extra sweet.
Yeah.
One very last thing I wanted to say here, we talked about how we have been very likely influenced with smaller European families in our decision. And I feel like, as you said that, I was like, oh, light bulb. Like, that's very likely why I assume we would have had a third, is because my friends have had third babies. Like, I would have just been doing the same as the people around me. My best friend's having a baby and it's around the same timeline. Well, that sounds fun to have a baby at the same time as a friend or family. Like, it just culturally is like people have more babies.
Sure. I mean, and you have the support where it's like we're on the same schedule, like we're going through it together. Like, sure, I can definitely see that. And I'm sure that some people, at least, I mean, you've told me about people you follow on social media, they'll be like, we're sisters and we plan to have kids like at the same time,
Yeah.
and just going it through together. So, yeah.
I mean, I've never experienced that, but I wish I would have, because that'd be so fun to be able to do. And also, as I say, would have just gotten pregnant because my friend did. Like, it would have been a very thought out decision still.
Still, yeah.
It just would have been strongly influenced by the normals around. And like, what a light and joy and like the best things that's happened to us is our babies.
Yeah.
So we're not having another baby because we don't want to experience that. We're not because we want to be able to have our attention divided only to two to give them more of us.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. Well said. So this next topic is about like our faith and belief, which we'll not talk about as detailed as the other episodes. But I do think had we stayed within Utah, kind of stayed within the same realm, it would have been a little bit different. We had already kickstarted, in my mind, we'd already kickstarted kind of our faith expansion and like our worldview expansion. Of course, when we had traveled for so long and we had just seen and heard so many different beautiful stories and seen how people live and worship and believe in general, like that definitely got our curiosity started. And I do think the path would have looked differently, more difficult, because, moving away, we had so much space to digest a lot of information, to think it through, to have conversations with just us, only us, that, yeah, I think that it would have looked a little bit differently. But it doesn't go without saying that I think we would have found ourselves in a similar position where maybe we wouldn't have left the church entirely or left as quickly. But I do think we would have been digging for more. We would have been asking more difficult questions, talking about how we can support marginalized communities and groups better, and questioning maybe some of like the practices. Like, I just think inevitably some of those conversations would have come up and our curiosity would have still led us to many of those conversations we had.
Yeah, I agree. Our ultimate decisions for leaving was strongly influenced by living abroad and like the cultures that we saw and the different way of lives. But maybe even more so, the largest factor was coming to realize all of this historical information that we never knew that led us to believe that it wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
And so like ultimately that was it, to feel like what our thoughts and perspective of the church always were, what we were told, all of the stories we were kind of fed, to realize that they weren't true. Well, then it's not true,
Yeah. Yeah, I have no idea how it would have all panned out, but I do hope in some ways that there would have been conversations with family, siblings, cousins. Like, I've been able to connect with several of my cousins now who are in similar situations where like they've decided to separate themselves from the church, to leave the church. It's for many of the same reasons, but just like their journey to get there was different. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that they would have like tried to come and recruit me to like get me out, because they don't, they've even told me like I don't want that for anyone else. But I do think those conversations at least would have came just based off of curiosity. Like, why do you believe differently now or whatever? I do feel like we would have probably been more open to ask those questions.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised though if at this time, 5 years since leaving Germany, that we would still be in the church, but way more nuanced, more progressive Mormons. I do think that the journey would have been inevitable, like you said, but if our friends, like we kind of talked about, were mostly built because of the church once COVID opened up, well, then we would have a lot more social pressure.
Yeah.
And that would be hard to leave a community that we would love. Like, there's so many good people who are members of the church. Like, that's without a doubt. Some of our favorite people are members of the church, and they're amazing people. And so I think we would have felt that more, and that would have been harder.
Yeah, for sure. It's a difficult one to think about because, again, once we hear and once you think and see things away, like it's hard to unthink them, right? We've said that again. Once you learn something, it's hard to unlearn it. And so like our perspectives right now, of course, are biased because we're like, well, of course we would have gotten there. But had we never came across certain information or our perspectives didn't change because of what we saw or experienced abroad, there are certain things that happen in life for a reason. And we believe that the decisions that we made impacted them and we made the best decision for us based off of it. But you never know what would have happened on the other side, in the other direction.
Yeah, I am very happy to be sitting here feeling the way I do about our decisions with spirituality, because I feel like what we have gained from our whole spiritual expansion, I feel like we're coming out with a more authentic, purposeful, joyful experience.
Yeah, I mean,
For
according
us.
to us.
Yeah, for us. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
speaking that it's superior to someone else, just like in my body, I feel that way.
Yeah.
Like
agreed.
my world feels so much bigger and more deeper.
Yeah.
Has more depth to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that I've felt the most depth in my life since we've made that decision. And as we've continually made that decision, then not. But yeah, we could have went a lot longer into that one, but I think it suffices enough that was a good insight of like the what if for faith and religion.
So the next topic we're going to be touching on is our marriage and how we think it would look now if we had stayed in Utah. So do you want to start off with that one?
It's kind of hard to say because we've grown so much because of the distance over here. We've talked each other's ears off and
and more.
and more. And I think there's just something that comes with spending time with someone almost uninterrupted. Of course, we had Willa, but like when she goes to bed or like we're in the car ride or we're like in situations right now where, we're not going over to like siblings or parents' houses like on a weekday or whatever. We have literally like hundreds of hours clocked in every month, I swear, where it's just like us talking about things. Mm-hmm. There's so much growth and connection that comes from that. So how would it have changed? I do think that we would have still grown and had the close relationship that we did. Like there's no doubt about that. But I do think in some ways we would have progressed a little bit slower on certain aspects, right? Not being able to have like maybe those difficult conversations about, I don't know, maybe even about like emotional labor, or maybe even about other aspects. Oh man, it's kind of hard to.
I do think if we would have been in Utah, we just would have had more people we're talking to in general. And there's only so much you can talk in a day, right? So if we're talking to friends and family and we're kind of just talking about our concerns or our frustrations or whatever it may be, the small, simple parts of life, maybe we wouldn't be sharing them in duplicates or for the third or fourth time, because we've already have been sharing them. So I can imagine maybe less conversation.
Maybe. And I also think this just came to me. I think because we would have been like in more social groups and whatever, we also would have been greatly influenced by those around us more. Like just the friends that you're around, like if they're into sports, like you're probably going to be doing more activities like watch parties and stuff. Like, but if you have someone who's very into finance, like I tend to like to talk about, or maybe you would have more of those. So I think that there's, in some ways, it's beautiful that you and I were able to have these conversations and still kind of like run with like the conversations that we were mostly interested in. I don't know if that would have meant like we were not able to dive in as deep on some of the conversations that we've had, but covered more topics.
Yeah, that's interesting. In my head, I wasn't thinking about like specific conversations necessarily, just like the amount of conversations. But I do think, yeah, we would have been influenced by friends and families and interests and dislikes. In general, I feel like naturally, when we moved abroad, we didn't have our built-in support system. And so because of that, when life gets hard, you are my main anchor. Of course, I can FaceTime my sister or call my mom, but it's different, Like you're the person who's there. And because of that, when we are having a hard time and we're in an argument, like I can't really have space away from you.
I do think you're right it had definitely taught us to come to some resolutions quicker, but it was like the growth through the difficult conversations. And even if we still had disagreements, like we still have to like continue on with life, you know, whether it's going to work, whether it's going to school, whether it's getting X, Y, and Z done. Like we rely on each other so much to get things done. There's not like these quote escapes to kind of go to. And there's like good and bad for having like support systems close by, as long as like it's not used as literally like an escape from your spouse. Then yeah, I think that's a good thing. Everyone needs space one time or another, whether it's to take a bike ride, take a walk, cool off in a conversation. But like truly, like if someone's escaping to go and just like avoid conversations like that, that doesn't work out for us. Like we have to face the conversations together, and that's what we've done, you know, over the last 5 years, is face them together, you know.
I don't know, you just know you're in it together. And because of the language differences and because of the cultural barriers and because of all the hard moves and the decisions we've made, all of those things have brought us together. The uncomfortable situations is where the growth happens. We've had so many situations like this that, in a sense, we're actively seeking them, right? Like, let's switch up our whole lifestyle and move to Japan, or let's switch up our whole life and move to Italy. You know, we're accepting change, which is hard and comes with a lot of uncomfort with that. But all of those things have just made us grow stronger and stronger and stronger together.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I feel like we'd still be the same people striving to be supportive of each other and loving of each other. I just think in so many ways, even the more intimate aspects of our lives would have just been different. Over here, where you have more time to explore and learn together, I think that's naturally part of like what comes on stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I think we're kind of seeing a trend here as we're talking about these scenarios, right? Is like we kind of envision our Utah life in a proverbial like bubble, right? Like a little shelter, like it's
Sure.
safe, it's comfortable, it includes so much love, it's a beautiful version. And because we've experienced this, we feel like there's more depth in our spirituality. And I think with this one, there's what feels like to us more depth too. Why are you laughing?
I just love us.
I just feel like there's more depth now, you know?
Yeah, I agree. All right, so next, you're going to talk about beauty culture.
Yeah, and this will be short, but I do think if we would have stayed in Utah, I would have participated more heavily in beauty culture, which beauty culture is a thing anywhere around the world. But particularly in Utah, I feel like there's a very high beauty culture standard. And so I feel like naturally, just by living there, being surrounded by people that are valuing a certain type of aesthetic, it's hard to not be influenced, at least. And I would say that's one of the things I have really loved living abroad, is being able to taste and experience different beauty cultures around the world. Because by doing that, I've been able to realize that it is like a culture. It's not like a universal standard, and that it changes. And that's really freeing. So we're actually going to be talking more about this in a future podcast episode, because it's something that's really impacted me. And it's been something that I've been passionate about even when we lived in Utah, as we were married, going through the dietetics program. I'm a personal trainer. It was in my world. Anyways, I'll leave it at that, but stay tuned for that episode.
So had we stayed in Utah, one aspect that we've been thinking about is like, what would we have missed? Even without knowing what we've experienced now, I think there would have been that continued desire to move abroad and to travel. Even when we went to Belize, we both talked to each other how we want to try and prioritize, and if possible, like to go on one international trip every single year after that. And I think we did pretty close to that, like all the way up until like when COVID happened. I think that still would have been like in our forefront, but we would have missed so many of the growth opportunities, the cultural opportunities, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I think we would have always been like seeking for that unknown, knowing that there's more world to explore and wondering what that would have looked like if we would have chosen another path other than to stay in Utah. I do feel like even prior to our backpacking trip, we were feeling a little restless in Utah, and especially when we got back after that, like for sure, restless was kind of the overarching feeling. So yeah, I do agree with that. What we have is what we would have wondered about. It's interesting though, because I wonder if we would have ever felt like real true contentment with that, you know?
It's hard to know, of course. Like, I think we would have always tried to make the best with the situation we were in, truly.
No
And
doubt.
I think that we would have still created a great community of life, even if that meant, we were still in the same place that we were in when we did leave. But I do think that there would still be a part of us that would be curious of like, well, what if we just go for a year somewhere? What if we just take a little break in between jobs to just go and explore while our kids are young and while we're still able to? You know what I mean? Lots of what ifs in this moment, but I do think contentment would have been, maybe that's the right word for it too, contentment, rather than being like completely satisfied. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just feel like we've always had that burning desire to like see more, do more. And that doesn't go without saying that people who stay in one place, so many people choose that with so much mindfulness, and they choose that because that is genuinely the place that makes them feel the happiest.
Yeah.
And I know even in Utah, obviously we've been talking about Utah because that's where we grew up and where our life was before this. I know that there's so many happy, content people in Utah that wouldn't change their lives for anything. And that we could say that about any place in the world, right?
Yeah.
So I think we should say here, because I think it's important to say as we've, expressed our thoughts and feelings with it, we are genuinely so happy for anyone that feels like they just want to stay. This podcast episode is not to convince or encourage anyone to leave their place. It's more so about recognizing that leaving is what changed us. And honestly, it's just kind of fun to think about the what ifs.
Yeah, the hypotheticals are fun to talk about sometimes. But at the same time, thinking about the what ifs has also kind of solidified that the decision that we made was the one that we are very happy with.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of strange to think about like this parallel universe that we've been talking about, this hypothetical scenario. The us in that scenario, like if we would have stayed, I don't judge them for staying. I don't pity them for staying. They just would be different people.
Yeah, and like the world would have been different for us because it would have been smaller. Like it wasn't wrong, it wasn't better than anywhere else. It just would have been smaller. And for us, we knew that our world needs to grow. Like we just felt like there was so much more to it, and we're so glad that we made that decision to leave literally so much behind to get a new perspective on things. And for us, it's been incredible.
And we're so happy for anyone that finds joy in staying and being exactly where they are right now. And ultimately, that's what we want to end with is wherever you are, we just hope you're happy there.
So thanks for joining us here today, listening to this episode. It's been really fun to reminisce, kind of think about some of the old. So thanks for joining us here on this episode. We really appreciate the support and hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation.
Stay tuned for our next episode. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.